Às vezes as coisas acontecem de maneira maravilhosa.
Hello, everybody. That music makes me want to talk in the voice of a Light FM announcer. Good morning, you guys. Thank you for coming. It's an honor to be back at the festival. Oh, I don't have to keep this pressed down. Okay. I am Kate Kristensen, and before we begin, I would like to let you know that books by authors in this program can be purchased from Community Bookstore immediately to the right when you exit the room. The authors will be also signing their books at that location. Authors, at the conclusion of the program, please go directly to your signing tables. Audience, please clear the room for the next program to be seated. Thank you. I had the distinctive honor and literary burden of judging the St. Francis Literary Prize for the second time this year with Ron Currie and Chris Abani. And I always think of judging a literary contest as the equivalent of jury duty for writers, but instead of determining whether someone is innocent or guilty, it's the opposite of that. It's determining the most worthy books in a pile of worthy books. So it's a great pleasure, and the sort of upshot of judging a contest is that it's very subjective. Like I think a different panel of judges might have chosen the exact same books we did because they're brilliant, but maybe they wouldn't have. And so judging a contest is ultimately an opportunity for a writer to articulate a set of literary criteria and a sort of idea of what makes a great contemporary novel. What sort of set of qualities are we looking for? And luckily for this contest, Ron and I are friends in real life, and we both live in Portland, Maine, and we had the opportunity to sort of go out and talk about what we were looking for as boxes of books, so many that the UPS delivery person thought I had a problem with ordering books. As these books stacked up in our houses and we started reading them, we met to talk about them and sort of to figure out, what are we looking for? What books are we going to choose? These are all books by mid-career writers. The prize is for the third to fifth book of fiction. So there's a particular kind of feeling in mid-career when you're writing. You have your early books behind you. You are ambitious. You are placing yourself in a sort of group of writers. You're sort of figuring out what you are and where you're going and stretching. And some books you can feel that, and some books you just feel like, holy shit, this writer is taking risks that he or she didn't have to take. And there's a feeling, as Ron said, I want to be punched in the gut. I think you said gut. Although he just said groin earlier. But this feeling of being socked off center, off kilter by a book, by a writer who has a lot to lose and a lot to prove, and didn't have to take these risks necessarily. An established writer who is sort of writing something wild and unexpected, and I started reading, and I started responding to the books as I was reading, and the ones that grabbed me and punched me in the gut were the ones that went straight into darkness and found beauty. And all 6 of the books on our short list, I'm sorry, the half of the writers couldn't make it, but they're here in spirit, and we're celebrating them too. The 6 books we chose, every one of them is different from all the others. Every one of them has a different voice, a different geography, different aims, different style, different characters, different setting. It's very varied. But one thing they all share is that quality of plunging straight into the darkness It's shimmering, it's velvety, it's violent, it's dangerous, it's surprising, it's tricky. In all these books, there's a kind of feeling that I don't always get from contemporary literature. I feel like 5 of the books are American and addressing American life in a way that I feel in each of them exposes something that we all feel, something shimmering at the edges of our experience as Americans right now in this particular time, and exposes it in a way that is beautiful. I mean, I think beauty is an underrated quality, and I think all of these books are astonishingly beautiful. And Samantha Hunt doubled down in her title. That's how committed she was to the darkness. But each of these books by these 3 authors explores questions like, what is it like to sacrifice yourself and die for someone else? What is it like to kill someone? What is it like to be transformed? What does it mean to be dispossessed? What does it mean to be lost in the wilderness of your life? And all of these things are urgently important right now, I think. And beyond a larger political question, they address what it's like to be human in our historical time. And I think that they're important for that. And I think that in choosing them, we're rewarding that kind of risk-taking, which should be rewarded, especially in mid-career. And I hope that this recognition for all of them is the first of many to come. And I hope they all are working on books now so that I can read them again soon. They're all going to read a little of their books to sort of get the conversation going. And I have been asked to introduce each of them, and so I will. We'll start with David Joy. David Joy, I'm not going in the order that it was given. I'm going in the order that it came to me this morning when I was writing about their books. First, I'll read the bio, and then I'll talk a little about his book. David Joy is the author of The Line That Held Us, winner of the 2019 Southern Book Prize. Congratulations. The Weight of This World, Where All Light Tends to Go, an Edgar finalist for Best First Novel, and the memoir Growing Gills, A Fly Fisherman's Journey. He is a recipient of an artist fellowship from the North Carolina Arts Council. His latest short stories and essays have appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Garden and Gun, and The Bitter Southerner. He lives in the North Carolina mountains. The Time That Binds Us is, I was reading it and I felt like I was hallucinating at times. It's about an Appalachian feud between essentially 2 families, but not in the usual way. It starts out with a man poaching game on his neighbor's farm. And it ends up at a place so surprising and so original and so insanely beautiful and terrifying that I can't even explain it, really. I mean, I hope you'll all read it if you haven't already. And getting there, when I got to the end of this book, I had to go back to the beginning and sort of trace the line that brought us to this ending, which I've never seen done before in a book. It's startlingly original and wholly organic to the book, but I didn't see it coming. As I was reading, I thought, how is he going to end this? Where's this book going to go? It keeps going off in crazy directions, which to me is a great joy. All these books do that. That's one of the joys of reading, is to be surprised and curious and startled. And the language is so beautiful that there's almost a velvet tenderness to the violence. It's encased in this glorious writing. I thought, who the hell is this guy? So here he is, David Joy.
There we go. The way that this book starts is a guy is hunting in the woods, sees what he believes to be a pig, shoots it, gets up close to it and realizes it was a man poaching ginseng. And that's based off of something that happened where I lived, where it was similar, but the guy was poaching Gaelics. I think novelists a lot of times start with something real and then twist it or turn it on its head. And so I thought, well, hell, what if he's drunk? And then what if the person he shot, was somebody that he felt the need to cover it up? And so the novel starts with this accidental homicide and then the guy covering it up. And the reason that he feels like he has to cover it up is that he comes from this very notorious family, and this is this guy's brother. Dwayne Brewer goose-stepped down the beer aisle of the Franklin Walmart wearing a latex chimp mask he'd found on the floor by the Halloween decorations. The mask was hot and his breathing was loud. The inside smelled of cheap molded rubber, and he slicked the nylon hair back through his fingers while he chuckled at a woman who sneered. She wore pastel-colored scrubs and white tennis shoes, her highlighted hair pulled back in a ponytail. Through the eye slits of the mask, he saw a little girl, maybe 6 years old, with one of her fingers hooked in the corner of her mouth, standing beside the woman. Dwayne scratched under his armpit with one hand and clawed at the back of his head with the other, hopping around bow-legged like a monkey, and the child laughed. He pulled the mask off and tossed it into the open cooler, his skin cold with sweat as he ran his hand over his face and reached for a case of Bud Heavy. Tearing a ragged hole in the cardboard, he fished out a beer and cracked the top. "Have a blessed day," he said with a wide smile, tilting the open can toward the woman and nodding. She eyed him like the fiend he was, her little girl hiding behind her legs, spellbound with curiosity as the giant man before her swallowed half the can in one tremendous gulp. The thing about Walmart was that even a man like Dwayne Brewer could go unnoticed. People pushed their buggies with dead-eyed stares, everything sliding by in the periphery. Consumerism scaled this large had a way of camouflaging class. At the end of the aisle, he squeezed past a beefy gal in tiny shorts who had a baby on each hip and 3 children running circles around her. One of the kids reached out as he made his next lap and knocked an end cap of Cool Ranch Doritos onto the floor. The woman was in the middle of a conversation with someone she knew, an older woman who had a toddler with her finger up her nose riding in the buggy. The beefy gal kept saying over and over, "Lord, no, this ain't mine," shaking the child on her left hip. "Me and Clyde stopped after this," and shaking the one on her right. "This here's Sarah's. You remember Sarah, don't you? This Sarah's little girl, Tammy. She's my niece." Buggies were banging and lights were flashing and cash registers were beeping and kids were wrestling a Halloween blow-up ghost decoration that was meant to stand in a front yard, and the sheer madness of it was enough to send any sane person into a seizure, but Dwayne didn't have a care in this world. He strutted right through the middle of the chaos, smiling because it was Friday, and he had a wad of cash in his pocket from pawning 5 stolen chainsaws and a flat-screen TV. Black teddies and blood-red lingerie were rolled back to $9.87. He finished that first beer standing by the floor rack, running satin through his fingers with his eyes closed, daydreaming about the last woman he'd slept with. When he was finished, he crumpled the can in his fist, balanced it in the cup of the beige-colored bra, and opened another.
That's the language I'm talking about. Next is Brandon Hobson. Brandon Hobson is the author of Where the Dead Sit Talking, which was a finalist for the 2018 National Book Award, as well as other books. He has also won a Reading the West Book Award and a Pushcart Prize. He teaches creative writing at New Mexico State University and at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. Hobson is an enrolled member of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. And before you read, I just want to say about Where the Dead Sit Talking, it felt like a natural choice for us because it fulfilled all our criteria. This is a book that punches you in the gut, but quietly, with subtlety, and in a way that asks of you, the reader, an imaginative, I'm not sure what the word is. It's not a leap at all. It's a sort of collaboration with the writer in understanding the book's power, I think, in this quiet, dispossessed, depressed narrative voice. Underneath it, and this is what I mean by going into the darkness, and this is what I mean by finding the beauty in it, he makes you understand it's about a Native American kid in the foster system who comes to a house with another Native American kid. They're two teenagers, a boy and a girl, and they have an incredibly profound connection that goes beyond sort of the surface of daily life. It feels ancient. And in this connection between these two kids who are lost and dispossessed, one of them a very beautiful, glamorous, self-destructive girl, and the other, our narrator, a sort of apathetic and troubled kid, who nonetheless he has a kind of tenderness in his voice that won me over right away. And in this connection, I don't know how you did it. I feel viscerally, and I'm of European heritage. I live in New England. I'm a modern person. I grew up in Arizona with Native Americans, but I'm manifestly not one. I don't think I have a drop of Native American blood. And reading this book, I knew somehow, in a way that no book has ever shown me before, what that experience is like for contemporary Native Americans. And it's something that, you know, I feel like you could do it in a memoir, you could do it in essays, but to do it in a novel goes deeper, because it's an imaginative work. It's a world that completely immerses you and draws you in. And I came to the end of this book, and again, the ending, I had no idea where this book was going, something I love in a book. And I felt at the end, again, the compulsion to go back and to trace the thread that leads you to the unexpected and original and startling ending. And I feel like it's a book that stays with you after and by you I mean me. It stayed with me after I finished it. There was a kind of haunting that I felt in the aftermath of the book when the whole thing assembled in my mind as a work, which to me is the mark of literature. It's what books should do. And here he is.
Hi. I'm going to read just a couple of pages from Sequoia's, the protagonist, in his first night in foster care. The first night was strange. It came upon me like a burning memory, how shadows spread across the wall in this new room. And in trying to sleep, I revisited all the other rooms where I had slept in my past. My room at the shelter, with its dull concrete walls, absent of life and color, with one small window facing the brick building next door. My room in our first house, a small house built of rock that sat near a hill in the woods of Steely Hollow, with the bedroom full of wallpaper of ships at sea, and the small closet I feared held the monsters that lived there, creatures that crawled up from the dirt below the house, who howled in the night, whose shadows cast jagged shards of light across the ceiling when I tried to sleep. My room in the small apartment above the dirty bookstore, where I slept with a blanket the spirits had blessed with protection. I was more afraid there than anywhere. I heard sirens and traffic sounds at night. There were voices from the street outside. The room was the smallest room I've ever seen, as I now recall, and my mother's footsteps on the hardwood floors kept me awake until late in the night. My room in the foster home after my mother was locked up the first time, a room I shared with two other boys who slept in bunk beds. I slept on a trundle bed against the wall across from the window. The room was never frightening like some of the other rooms. though the boy on the top bunk thought it was, and spent many nights crying himself to sleep. And into this new room I was now thrown, or so it seemed, trying to sleep again, this room with its clock ticking on the wall by the door, with its shadows and lights stretching across the wall and the ceiling. And I remember how that first night in bed, I could hear George making sounds of explosions and gunfire with his mouth. It was something a younger boy might do while playing Army. In the darkness, I stared at the ceiling and waited for him to stop. After it went on a while, I finally sat up in bed and looked over at him. "I'm trying to sleep," I said. "Oh, I forgot you were here," he said. "I'm right here." I lay in bed with my arm over my eyes, trying to go to sleep. I felt a sadness, but also a kind of confusion. There was nothing I was afraid of and nothing to look forward to, which made me want to leave. Thank you.
Judging a contest is like, once you have your short list, or by you, I keep addressing you in the second person. Once I had the short list, I had the 6 books on my nightstand, and I kept them there like my little flock of precious lambs that I had assembled with my fellow judges. And their spines all went together so beautifully, and I felt this sort of protective and proprietary love for them and devotion. That's the level of commitment you get into when you judge a literary contest. But ultimately, we had to pick a winner because it was a contest. I feel like all 6 of these books won the contest. The winner we chose was Samantha Hunt's The Dark Dark, and it's a collection of short stories. And each story, and with a story collection, it's a collection of stories, but it's a work in itself. And I feel like it's a tricky thing, a collection of short stories in mid-career. It's a tricky thing to do. It's a tricky thing to pull off. And it's a tricky thing to do so well and pull off so well that you feel like it's not like any other collection of short stories that you've ever read. Samantha Hunt, I think of this book as a series of double shots of mezcal with a chaser of an electric jolt. I'm sorry. I believe I'm allergic to Brooklyn slightly. I lived here for 20 years. Each of these stories has not one extra word and not one word wasted, and yet they all feel rich and full and alive. And as stories can at their best, and they're funny. Samantha's humor reminds me of Flannery O'Connor's a little bit in its sort of unsparing, gimlet-eyed exposure of humanity, and that's sort of, we are the butt of the joke, but she's implicated too, and so she isn't cold or distant. But I feel like, unlike Flannery O'Connor's moral sort of sense of the universe, there's a playfulness in Hunt's stories that, I'm sorry, I was calling you Samantha. You're a serious author. I should address you as Hunt. There's a playfulness at work, and a kind of playing with the portal between what's real and what's quotidian in our daily lives, and the absolute mystery of existence, and what are we doing here, and who are we, and who are we to one another, and what is death, and how do things change in the blink of an eye into something else. And I think that it would be tempting to call them magical realism, a term I don't like, and which I resist in talking about these stories, because I think they all feel real. And this is the magic part. The writing takes you places that you don't expect, but it puts you there. You're absolutely grounded when a woman turns into a deer. You believe it. And you think, wait, maybe I've turned into a deer before and I didn't know it and didn't realize it. And the language itself is so buoyant and so imbued with this sort of simultaneity of an imagined reality and a real reality at the same time, that each story feels like it's full of all these possibilities that aren't actually in this, like a dream, that are sort of reverberating outward from each story. Which, damn, it's a pretty amazing collection, and she's a pretty amazing writer. And now she'll read some for you.
Thank you so much, Kate, and thank you, Ron, and thank you, St. Francis. What an honor and a pleasure it is to be here. I'll read a little tiny bit from one piece in here that's called A Love Story. And it is a love story, even though the piece I might read you doesn't appear to be that way. A coyote ate a 3-year-old not far from here. Really? Yeah, my uncle told me. Huh. He said, don't leave those babies outside again, as if I already had. Had you? Come on. An answer less precise than no. Why is he monitoring coyote activity up here? Because. Because? It's irresistible? Really? Again, a word that means I doubt your grasp on the truth. My uncle is so good at imagining things like a wild dog with a tender baby in its jaws disappearing into the redwoods forever. He makes the imagined things real. Yeah. Irresistible? It's what he does, a habit. I don't get it, my husband says. But I do. Every real thing started life as an idea. I've imagined objects and moments into existence. I've made humans. I've made things up. I tip taxi drivers $10, $20 every time they don't rape me. The last time my husband and I had sex was 8 months ago, and it doesn't count because at the time my boobs were so huge from nursing that their power over him, over all men really, was supreme. Now, instead of sex with my husband, I spend my nights imagining dangerous scenarios involving our children. It's less fun. Watch out, my uncle says, watch out. Taking his refuge in right-wing notions, living life terrified of differences. Once I was a drug dealer, back when pot was still illegal here. I'm a writer now. It's not that different from being a drug dealer. Both have something to do with levels of reality. Both offer flexible hours for mothers. I haven't made any money writing yet. Still, that's how I spend my days, putting things down on paper. People continue to come to my house to buy pot, and I sell it to them even though I'm no longer a drug dealer and they could get this shit legally, and I'm sick of the people who pop their heads in my door all friendly like, hey, how you doing? Fine, I'll say, but I mean, shut up and buy your drugs and stop thinking you're better than me. I probably won't have too many customers for much longer. There's got to be a whole lot of people who are better drug dealers than I am. When I was young, I shopped at the Army Navy with the thought that if I bought these clothes and wore them, it would prevent some beautiful young man from being killed in the garments. I'm a romantic. I'm writing about the coyotes, the kids, the taxi drivers, the drugs, and the romantic notions because I want to be as honest as I can. As I said, thoughts become material. I want to make truth. It's too bad I have to say this, but I will. I'm not hysterical or crazy. I'm providing a guided tour to a woman with hormones. Let's talk about differences. Let's lay the groundwork for real honesty, for biology, for belief, for no more. Really? I had great hopes that the threat of Lyme disease would revitalize our sex life. Will you check me for ticks? You know, and things would go from there, grooming each other as monkeys do. In that way, at least for a while, I got him to touch me again, and that felt good. But then Lyme disease never really took off in California like it did on the East Coast. We moved out of the city because there's no room for non-millionaires there anymore. In the country, life's more spacious. We bought a king-size bed. Some nights we snuggle like people in an igloo, all 5 of us. Those nights, our giant bed is the center of the universe, the mothership of bacterial culture. It's populated with blood, breast milk, baby urine, a petri dish of life forms like some Hogan of old. Those nights, I know we are safe. But when our children sleep in their own rooms, my husband and I are left alone on the vast plain of this oversized bed, feeling separate again, feeling like ugly Americans who have eaten too much. Again. When one turns to the internet for mothering advice, one finds a plague of perfectionism. One could be led to believe that mothering means Alice in Wonderland birthday parties, Spanish-speaking nannies, healthy children harvesting perfect blue eggs from a backyard coop, homeschooled wonders who read by age 3, flat, tight bellies, happy husbands, cake pops, craft time, quilting project, breast pumps in the boardroom, micro vineyards of Pinot grapes, ballet tights, cloth diapers, French braids, homemade lip balm, tremendous flat pans of paella prepared over backyard fires. What sort of sadist is running these internets? And more important, how do these blogs not constitute acts of violence against women? I glimpsed a huge beyond when I became a mother, the enormity of an abyss, or the opposite of an abyss, the idea of complete fullness, the anti-death, tiny gods everywhere. But now all that the world wants to hear from me is how I juggle children and career, how I managed to get the kids to eat their veggies, how I lost the weight. I will never lose this weight. Thanks.
Just a few questions for you guys, if you will. The first thing I wanted to ask, and I realized in thinking about this morning that a lot of the questions that I came up with are because I myself am preoccupied with being a mid-career author. But I wonder what, if anything, that term means to you, specifically with regard to what I'm interested in hearing is if the actual practice of writing has changed at all for you from your first book to your second book to your third book. The way that you apprehend the business side of things, publishing, any of that. What does it mean to you, in essence, to be a mid-career author? And given how you feel about that, what does this, this sort of recognition that's specifically coded to that point in your career, what does it mean?
I hope to God I ain't a mid-career author, in that I'm only 35 years old, and I mean, I'd have to kick off in the next 5 or 6 years, and I hope that don't happen. So I'm hoping I can keep her. I want to be, Laura Lippman. I just seen Laura Lippman had a contract for her 26th and 27th book, and it's like that's something to aspire to. So maybe I'd like the different definition. But as far as the way that the process has changed, I was at dinner with my agent last night, and we were talking about why so often debut novelists fall off the face of the planet and never have another book. And I told her, I said, well, one of the things that people don't understand is that process is constantly evolving, and a lot of times it's hard as hell to refine that process. When I wrote that first novel, it was all new, and it seemed like every book has gotten harder and harder and harder. When you reach the end, I think maybe the prose is cleaner with a first draft, but it seems like I'm getting worse at it instead of getting better.
Yeah, and the old chestnut is that I think the old chestnut is your second book is your hardest, but as with any other aphorisms of any kind, like that seems to me that something spoken by somebody who's never tried a third. It really does get progressively more difficult, I think. Anybody else?
I feel like a tremendous amount of freedom at this time in my life, and that I've been able to, in terms of writing, not freedom. I have 3 small children and a full-time job besides writing, but I feel freedom in terms of like, I know what I want to write about. I know what the questions are that I now ask.
And how is that different from before?
I think before I felt the power of my influences in a great way. I mean, of course, influences are essential, but I maybe was beholden to them a little too much. And so now...
The anxiety of influence.
The anxiety of influence, exactly, yeah. And so now I really feel like, okay, I know what it is that I'm exploring through writing, and that feels a lot more free.
So you've worked your way into a confidence that you didn't have before.
Yeah, absolutely. And so,
God
yeah,
bless you.
so this like kind of verification that it made sense to people, that it resonated, is incredible.
That's great. I wish that was the experience that I've had, but that's wonderful. What about you, Brandon?
I guess the difference for me, I don't really feel like a mid-career writer. I think part of that is I had 3 books that were very small press that, nobody read, right? So I think the difference is David and Samantha have both had a lot more success, from the very beginning. So I think that my work right now is just starting to, sort of evolve.
Great. This is sort of a related question. And again, this is something that I'm preoccupied with sort of figuring out as somebody who's, I'm older than you, David, but I hope that I'm not in mid-career as well. But I've found that what I'm wondering is, how do you balance the demands of what I call civilian life? People who don't write are civilians to me. With the writing life, and specifically about longevity. And, as you were saying, like, debut novelists, you have to put out an Amber Alert on them sometimes, like they just go away, right? So is there something that you do to balance your writing with the rest of your life, the demands that it places on you, the fact that by and large we live in a culture that doesn't necessarily value what we do, to sort of maintain the fact of being a novelist or being a writer?
One thing I want to quickly say about that is that maybe that it was the only advantage of being a female author for so long, is I was used to being ignored in some way. I was like, okay, nobody's paying attention. And so reaching this point in my career, I meant to read the part about this. There's in that story about this woman who's looking around and she's like, feels like she's stinky, rotten blue cheese. And she's looking at a 19-year-old boy and she's like, I am so complicated, I would kill a boy of his tender age. And I feel like that's part of what this prize is to me, that it was, I don't know, I guess I've gotten comfortable with being the stinky, rotten blue cheese, and having that complexity, and so the balance, it's not a balance, but it's just me being stubborn and pushing through.
Which is as succinct and accurate a representation of, or description of, the writing life as any, right?
Yeah.
Like banging your head against the wall until you have a manuscript, basically. What about you, David?
I think, well, for one, I think that I come out of an oral storytelling tradition more than a written storytelling tradition, and in a lot of ways, I think I'm different than a lot of writers in that I don't have an MFA. I don't work at any. A lot of writers seem to work at colleges. I'm not around academics. So the people that I'm surrounded by are people like who I write about. So like last night I was sitting at dinner and a buddy texted me and he was like, hey, come down to the high school, there's a wrestling match. And they were having this amateur wrestling match in the gym. And it's like, that's like, I know for a fact if I'd been there, I'd have seen something and it'd be like, boom. Like I'd have went home and just started writing.
Right.
Or that somebody will say something, and it's just like, boom. And so for me, I'm lucky in that I'm constantly immersed in the place and the language of the people that I write about. And I'm very place-centered. Everything I've written is set very specifically in Jackson County, North Carolina, where I live. And so for me, I find tremendous comfort in that. I'm every day I'm inspired by something. that I see right around me.
So in a weird way, there's no escaping the writing for you.
Yeah. It's almost like documentary, and I mean, it's just seeing what's happening and playing with it. I mean, one of the scenes that started that character Dwayne Brewer, it was at a wrestling match in a high school, and I remember this guy come in gooned out on meth, and his eyes was real wide, and he come up and he stood at the side of this ring, and it was like he was looking at Christ. And he was just amazed. And about that time, this little fella jumped on the corner turnbuckle, and he had a can of Aquanet and a lighter, and he made like a blowtorch, like, whoo, and this guy was just, it was like he had found salvation, and that character in a lot of ways became Dwayne Brewer.
Okay.
Like I love
that shit. Yeah, it's fantastic. How about you, Brandon?
What was the question?
Yeah, I was going to ask if you remember the question.
It's basically
It's basically just like, how do you, as an experienced and accomplished novelist at this point in your life, how do you balance the demands of your regular life along with writing?
The balance. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, well, I mean, so I live in New Mexico now. I grew up in Oklahoma. I've always had a heavy teaching load, right? And I have kids. I have two kids. So I've always tried to manage my time. There's not a whole lot to do in Oklahoma, right? So, but I also don't watch television. So I, every single night from roughly 10 p.m. till 2 or 3 a.m. I set aside for writing, and between balancing that with teaching, is extraordinarily difficult, right? But this is something that I've been writing. I'm in my 40s. I've been writing for a long time, and so it's just always something that I've done and do almost every day.
So it's a very practical approach to the work, and this is something that I teach a little bit, and I always try to impress upon my students that this is labor like any other. It's just a matter of doing the work sometimes and not complicating it, right? Yeah. So we're running a little bit low on time. I had other questions I want to ask, but briefly, what's next for each of you?
I'm working on a new novel, a new story collection, a collection of essays.
Are you working on a story? So are you just writing stories, or are you working on a collection?
No, I'm just writing stories, which is how I wrote The Dark Dark too. It just turned out that they kind of worked together. Yeah. And a YA novel. I gotta have a lot of projects, because whenever one starts to stink, then I just move on to the next one. And then by the time I get back around to that first one, I'm like, hey, you're not so bad.
Or you might have figured out a solution.
I might have figured it out.
Of just letting it steep, right? It's one thing that I wanted to say about The Dark Dark when Kate was talking about it was they do go together. And not only it's the first couple of stories sort of declare. It's like a mission statement for the rest of the book. So you do end up coming to expect that mystery. What's the weird, fucked up, bizarre, hilarious thing that's going to happen in this story, because you've set the terms at the beginning of the book, which is another thing that's unusual in a story collection, I think. How about you, David?
I got a novel come out next summer called When These Mountains Burn. I'm starting a new novel, working on a couple of essays. I got an essay that I've been working on for New York Times Magazine. I don't know if anybody had followed the coverage they did recently about American slavery. Anybody?
Yeah.
I think that's the most brilliant. Yeah, I think that's the most brilliant piece of journalism that's taken place in this country this year, particularly. But I'm working on an essay that's supposed to kind of come on the heels of that.
I'm doing the last revisions on a new novel, and I'm not sure when it's coming out. Maybe early 2021. right now. It's called The Removed. It's about a family dealing with grief of a lost family member, but it's a Cherokee family, and there's also some Cherokee mythology throughout the book.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. This has been a real pleasure. Kate, I believe, has some housekeeping.
I've been charged with the closing statement, but I also want to thank Timothy and Ian for entrusting us with this incredible honor to select these writers from such a worthy bunch of books.
And it's really, I mean, I feel like I should say, sort of dovetailing on that, patronage is important to the arts, right? And it comes in a lot of different forms, but a $50,000 prize for a novel in this country is a remarkable thing. It's a big deal from a wonderful and small school. So I just wanted to say that's a tremendous, tremendous thing.
And to reward a third to fifth book, it's a really important prize. And to have been asked to administer it is an honor. Thank you. And it's run really well, this prize, I think. And there's a lot of camaraderie behind the scenes, which doesn't always happen, let me just say. So in closing, and thank you to the Brooklyn Book Festival. This festival is fantastic. I'm happy to be back here. I think this is my fourth time. And each time I come, I remember why it's an important festival and why writers love it. Writing is lonely. Traveling here to meet other writers and to meet readers is an honor. It's like the gravy of our lonely work. So thank you also to the festival. And now, in closing, so we don't go over time, thank you for coming. The authors will now be signing their books immediately to the right when you leave the room. Community Bookstore will be selling their books there. Authors, please bring your name cards to the signing table.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.